Indeed, there are many pressing issues that we're going to discuss again this year. Press freedom, of course, misinformation, of course, news avoidance, of course, the model of journalism and the business model, of course, the media capture, in other words, and artificial intelligence. So, however, throughout the past 7 years, we at the IMED Forum see that the landscape for journalists is taking a new direction. To discuss about all this, I would like to ask the speakers of our first panel to take the stage, please. I would like to welcome Charlie Beckett, Professor of Economics and Political Science at LSE. Jelani Cobb, Dean of the Columbia Journalism School. María Teresa Ronderos, Director at the Latin American Center for Investigative Journalism. Justin Arenstein, Founder and Chief Strategist at Code for Africa. And Sandrine Rigaud, Program Director, and congratulations. Sandrine of Global Investigative Journalism Network. It's a very fresh new, that's why congratulations, and we work very closely, and we're very proud with GIJN. So thank you all for being here today with us. As I said earlier, 3 years ago, we were discussing, and as a central theme, we had the trust. So the trust in media, obviously, or lack thereof. I think we can all agree the situation dictates we dig even deeper today. So, for instance, what is true? What is considered truth? But the most important, to whom does it really matter? This is what this discussion is all about, and that's why this year's International Journalism Forum carries the title Navigating the Age of Doubt. It's a feeling we can't shake, and it's a concept we feel permeates every aspect of our lives and our mandate as newspersons, those can serve the public. Our main task is to serve the public, not just to make the public to feel good or to feel bad, or it's not about feelings, it's about serving the public, and at the same time, keep power in check. The fourth estate, in other words, ask the important questions. So, let me start with all of you, a question to all of you, which is, how do you feel, although we are not talking about feelings in journalism, nothing has to do with feelings, but from your own personal point of view, according to your path so far, how do you feel about journalism, and specifically, if you could please describe us the state of journalism today. Where do you think we are at? Let's start from the end.
Yeah, it's a big question. Just let me start with something. I come from France, and today our former president, Nicolas Sarkozy, was sentenced to, condemned to a 5-year jail sentence for criminal conspiracy. It's huge, and it's the direct consequence of an investigation that was launched by a journalist called Fabrice Arfi, who's working for Mediapart, very important investigative outlet. So let me start with the good news. Our work has impact, we're still relevant. But yeah, this is great. But still, I mean, you're framing the question in an existential way. I think this is really important, and we're all, I think, are asking ourselves the question of our raison d'être in a world where rising authoritarian regimes are silencing journalists, where powerful economic powers and billionaires are, at best, considering us as nuisance and that they can bypass, where we're losing the trust of the audience. There are many reasons for that. I like to date it back to, perhaps it's a generational thing, but to the explosion of the internet. We have, clearly it has crushed our business models, it has also, it's also at the origin of the loss of power we're all experiencing. And Joel Simons, the former director of CPJ, was articulating this very clearly. He explains that now we're not the only channel that people have to go through to reach public opinion. So we have lost this huge power, and it was a leverage. This is also making us much more vulnerable. We're less powerful, so we're more vulnerable. And as a former editor-in-chief of Forbidden Story, I was experiencing that. So we were following the story of assassinated journalists, and yeah, we have a lot of work, clearly. So yeah, this is for the reason, but I mean, there are a lot, many reasons to doubt, but in the same time, I think the good way of looking at that is that it makes us change in a good way. We have clearly, I think, we're becoming better. As an investigative journalist, I realized that the standards have become much better now than 20 years ago when I started to work as a journalist. We're becoming more creative. It's difficult, business models are difficult to find, but one of the members of GIJN, CIPR, lost 90% of its funding in 2017, and it shifted to a membership model, and it's working very well now. So this is important. I think we also are becoming, because we're less powerful, more humble, more transparent. And tomorrow, Joy Meyer is speaking here. I think it would be great to listen to her. She's explaining how much transparency and humility is important to reconnecting with our audience. And just to finish, I also think this has created this huge move to more collaborations. I've experienced that at Forbidden Stories, where we were pursuing the stories of silenced journalists, but we were doing that as a group. And it made us so much stronger than doing it on our own. So it gives us more power in a way. At GIJN, where I'm program director now, we are also, having so many members, including CLIP and Code for Africa, who are, promoting our big champions of collaboration. And I think we have to be in this mindset. Problems are becoming global, and we need to work together to find solutions.
To be connected. Thank you. Justin?
So I think, and I agree with you, we are relevant, but I think that increasingly our relevance is being challenged, where people are doubting that we actually still have a role, traditionally as media in the world. And in the newsrooms that we work with, and we work across newsrooms in Africa, and I'm actually based in the Caucasus, so we work in that region as well. The editors and the senior journalists we're speaking to are actually even doubting who their audiences are anymore. Who are we writing for and who are we producing for? Is it an algorithm? Is it an AI bot that's simply taking our content and turning it into some kind of chatbot somewhere else? Or are we still writing and producing for humans as a primary audience? So I think that there is a lot of questioning about what that relevance means and where our role is in this very rapidly evolving information ecosystem. And it's all changing. I mean, the business model's changing, as you said, completely. It's not changing, it's collapsed. So we have to be creative about figuring out how we make this work pay for itself. I started out as an investigative journalist. It's time-consuming, it's difficult, and increasingly, as more data and the better techniques become available, it's more expensive to do as well, even when we collaborate. I think that the problem that we see with a lot of our media partners and others who are supporting good journalism is we're still fighting to save media as corporate organizations, rather than figuring out how we make journalism itself survive and transform and make it more powerful. And so one of the challenges is, how do we think about that? In the newsrooms that I work in, and we're busy going through a merger, so I come from a very tech data-driven organization, so we're a bit of a hybrid. We're busy doing a merger with a very traditional journalism-first organization, ICFJ in the US. And melding those two worlds together, one of the realizations that we've had over the past year is that we celebrated journalism, even good investigative journalism, as storytelling. We need to tell compelling stories to make people feel deeply, to take action, and to be brave. And increasingly, I think we're realizing that there are loads of other people out there doing that already. Journalism creators, even journalism-adjacent people who are already doing really compelling storytelling. And so what can we do that's different to everyone else? And the realization we've come to is that we need to be sense makers, not storytellers. We need to be helping people to figure out this really complex world that they're living in, and it's getting more and more complex. We need to help them decipher it in a way that becomes super actionable, whether it's investigative or just explanatory. Figuring out what does it really mean so that we can do something that's meaningful with it in our real world, rather than just as entertainment. And so I think that there is really a chance here for us to leverage these new technologies to figure out how we can get beyond just the hook, which is the story, to give people like really actionable information, but even better, really actionable insights or understanding about this world that they live in. And how we do that, I don't know. I don't think any of us really know at the moment.
Yeah, but I think that if we understand, because I have to say that at some point you mentioned that, Justin, during a prep call that we had with our speakers while we were getting close to this panel today. And I have to say, openly, I have copied you since that day. With anyone that I'm discussing about journalism, journalists or not journalists, because everyone, only because I'm journalist, they ask me, what do you think about journalism? How do you imagine and envision the future of journalism? And I think that it's a key word, sense makers, because what we lost as journalists, but also as civics, on behalf of the audience now, is the understanding and, having the connection with journalists who know what exactly is our problem so that they can know and be able to raise our voice, because they're supposed to be this, but also bring us some results so that we can understand and make sense in the end of the day of what's going on around us. So I think that this is a key point that can help us a lot to find the starting point, because I also think that it is also confusing which is the starting point, exactly because we're talking about a doubt, not only a lack of trust, but a doubt in general. Sorry for this mention, but as journalists, but also as a human being, it made an interesting sense, the name and the ability to really look for sense makers to our lives.
And I think sense-making plays to our strengths. We challenge, we ground truth things, and we dig into it to figure out what does it really mean. Because often the first version is what they want you to believe. So we need to get beyond that and figure out what the reality is behind it.
Okay. Thank you. María.
Well, from my point of view, I founded El Clip, which is a Center for Latin American Investigative Reporting. It's in the Media Village, if people want to know a little bit more about it. So what we do is cross-border collaborative journalism. We started it about 6 years ago with a bunch of colleagues, women colleagues from Latin America, and one data scientist. I think we are a bit, if you ask me, it would be like asking the Catholic Church 20 years after the invention of the press, how did they feel about it? So the Catholic Church had all the power. It had all the mediation of society. It produced all the books with the monks. And then all of a sudden, it lost the mediation. It was no longer the mediator. Yeah. And so 20 years after that, probably, they were completely lost, and they were scared, and they were witch hunting. And that's how many media are doing. They're attacking everybody who's not a journalist, who is really a journalist, who's not a journalist. And they're trying to do witch hunting. And I think that's completely the wrong way to do it. What I think is that there's many more mediators out there, from NGOs to influencers, to YouTubers, to whatnot, because there's no longer control. And we just should not be afraid of that. we should embrace it. And the problem is that people in the fringe, people in the extremes have sort of occupied the center of that discussion. And we should see, and that I agree with Justin, we don't know the answer, but our challenge is how do we occupy that center? Because they're not just occupying the center, they're also occupying governments, and they're capturing governments. So what we need is how do we create a space where journalism is shared with everybody else who's producing information, but somehow we add to that equation the knowledge of somebody, of a team of professionals with about, 100 years of experience, maybe more, of how to verify, curate, complement. I also like another metaphor, which is people, the public, ate very bad food for many long time, and they thought that the best thing was a McDonald's, sorry for McDonald's, and you get sick if you eat too much junk food. The same happens with information. If you consume too much junk information, your mind gets sick. And so you need to, they are learning, so we have to help the audiences produce information with us, because they're no longer their audiences and us speakers, and curate that information with us, because they may have more knowledge than we do in many topics, and learn how to really appreciate good information and to separate, what's the expression in English, the wheat from the
chaff.
Chaff, exactly. So that's the point I want to do. The other thing about journalists not being credible, journalists not being heard of, I'm a little bit weary about that, because I think they still play a very important role in most of the world. The proof of that is that we see journalists being silenced, persecuted, driven into exile. If we were not important, if nobody was listening to journalists, then why would people even bother to persecute them, no? In Latin America, we have this number of journalists who have been stripped of their country, in Nicaragua now even of their nationality. They're being pushed out, they've been harassed, and we're going to have a very interesting panel that we'll talk about here, about slaps and legal harassment, which has become impossible. So I do think that journalism and the need for good information for society is still very, very strong. We just need to navigate this with humbleness, like you said, Sandrine. And that's my feeling. I feel very strongly about this because I'm very optimistic with the work we do with collaboration, with new technology, making it much more powerful. And we're really taking advantage of that.
Thank you. Jelani?
I think that I want to echo the sentiments of some of the previous speakers, but when I talk about the landscape of journalism, I typically will say that it's the best of times, it's the worst of times. The latter is more obvious than the former. The worst of times, for all the reasons that we have outlined, the astounding number of journalists who have been killed just in the past year, or in the year before that, the global decline in trust, the concomitant vulnerability that we experience because of that decline in trust, the challenges of technological disruption, the challenges of the crumbling business model. We can go on and on and on. If I go much further, I have to buy everyone a drink because it becomes depressing to talk about. But I also think that it's important, as journalists, that we look at the entirety of the story. And were we not beset by all the things that I just listed, if we took all of those things off of the ledger and then introduced a neutral observer and then inquired, what do you think of journalism? They would say it is astoundingly dynamic, that if we went even a generation back, we're capable of doing journalism in ways that would astonish earlier generations of journalists. We're capable of doing investigations that would simply have been beyond the reach of journalists who came before us. That we have a standard set of kind of business models for how journalism has operated for decades, and we're now being pushed to explore really dynamic, radical new ways of disseminating information, of supporting the reporting that produces that information, of everything that we think of, the foundational assumptions about journalism are up for grabs. We're questioning things, and we're doing things in dynamic ways. Most of the time that we talk about AI, for instance, it is from the lens of, how will it impact, how will it damage what we do as journalists? But most of us here in this room are familiar with the kinds of work that's being enabled and being facilitated by it. That there will be a positive side of the ledger and a negative side of the ledger. And when I talk with my students at Columbia Journalism School, one of the main things that I do is try to encourage them to think about the entirety of this. And then finally, we are more necessary than we have ever been before. Our audiences may not even be cognizant of that, but the work that we do is more vital, more required. Sure, we are embattled, even besieged, but there's no question that our work has been foundational to democracy. And just as, if there's any question about that, it can be seen in how our democracies are faring at a time when journalism has had so many obstacles to navigate.
Thank you. Charlie?
Yeah, thanks. So many words of wisdom there, it's difficult to add to all that. But the first thing I would say is that the age of doubt is actually a wonderful opportunity for journalism. Because I can tell you that if you lived in an age of certainty, you would be very bored and you would be probably living in a totalitarian regime. Now, people obviously has been told already that people in the Global South are quite used to this idea of being battered all the time because you're a journalist and being under-resourced as a journalist. And there's a lot that the rest of the world can learn from those experiences. I think there is, as Jelani was saying, there's a kind of paradox of power at the moment for journalism, which is that the ability to do individual acts of journalism has never been more extraordinary. The resources and the potential that we can do. And I know that because I used to work as a journalist for 20 years back in the analog era, and we were so constrained, so limited by so many things. And yet, people still talk about trying to go back somehow to recover where journalism was, because, as I said, the paradox of power is at the same time, as a sector, we have lost our institutional might. And I actually think that's quite a good thing. I don't want Rupert Murdoch running the world again, I like the idea, as has been suggested, that we've got to think of much more networked, much more collaborative ways of working. We mustn't assume that we know better. We mustn't assume that we can speak for the people when the people can speak for themselves. So I think we have to think quite differently about our roles as, whatever you want to say, coordinators, curators, but also as experts, as people who are passionate about finding out things, who are passionate about trying to understand why there are conflicts, why is there so-called polarization. By the way, why is polarization a bad thing? If you think homosexuality should be illegal, well, I'm polarized with you, for example. So again, I don't think journalism's job is to somehow cure the ills of the world, to solve polarization, even to stop conflict as such. I think we've got to be much more brutally realistic. We do have the skills, and we are adopting better ways of working, but we certainly can't do it alone. I want to turn quickly to AI, because that's what I've been working on the last decade. I run this global journalism AI project. We do loads of training, but more importantly, we work with thousands of journalists around the world, especially in the global south. And when you work with those people, it's inspirational. But it's also really impressive because they are finding ways, often in very niche ways, often at kind of hyper-local level or specialist or mission-driven around a particular topic or a particular community. They are finding ways to do their journalism. And they're doing it in very innovative ways, and they're doing it in very audience-focused, audience-centered ways. So AI, to them, what is that? Is it an existential threat? Well, it is. It will take away attention. It will provide competition. It will be used by horrible people to do a load of stupid and bad journalism and information as well. But I'm watching those people, and please go to our Innovation Challenge website. Look at the extraordinary things that these people are doing. Yes, we're giving them support, but we're hoping that other people will follow in their pathways. And it's not just about the tech. It's about those people and how they use the tech to supplement their work. And do you know what? That's the bit, actually, that worries me. Because in a world where AI, for example, becomes more important, then, of course, the bit that's going to make you stand out is your human values, your human skills, your human connectivity to the other humans, the public in the real world. And my question is, do we really, as journalists, honestly have the skills and the ability to do that? We think we do, but I put that question, do we really have that ability to make that leap?
Thank you, Charlie. So I think that we got a great sense with regards to journalism and journalists, and from where should we start this discussion around, again, journalism and journalists. But as we know, tango needs two, so what about the audience? And I want to ask you, María Teresa, is our challenge not just reporting news, but also making people care? And if yes, I assume how? How nowadays, I mean?
Well, I think we've been trying to, and this is, of course, all experimental because we don't have answers. We're experimenting. But because of what Daniel was saying, that we are experimenting with having audiences producing information, not just being audiences and just taking everything we have. Audiences know more about many subjects that we know. And we want them to be able to participate with us. And that's why we are able to get to know people, or the data of people, not just to sell them stuff, which we don't because we are a non-for-profit, but to also know what they know and call upon them when we need to produce a story that they know more about than we do. And it's not about, it's a little bit like the old-fashioned source, but in a much more massive scale, and also in a way that it's much more inclusive, and audiences create sort of spaces of trust. And I think with AI, we're starting to experiment like AI agents that could go and look for that audience and connect it to the journalism we're doing, the story we're doing, so that we can produce information together and shape that AI in a fair and a respectful way with the producers of the content, so that information is not just stolen and used wherever, however they want to use it. So I do think we did this recent exercise with about 15 media outlets about holding to account big tech precisely, and trying to say, okay, how can we know how you're shaping laws and regulations in these countries? Because people don't like to take such big, powerful companies at the same time. So that's how collaboration works. And with that, the audience helped us a lot, because they sent us lots of cases in which they felt that the way big tech was using their content was not fair and was not good. And we were able to document about 3,000 cases of lobby on how they influence the public domain, like the congresses of different countries, not to have laws that would affect them or curtail their ability to do whatever they wanted to. And I think that's an example, just an example of the kinds of experiments we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Justin, if journalism is seen as just content, should we adapt or push back?
I think journalism's always adapted. I mean, there was a time when people thought having graphic designers and photographers in a newsroom was revolutionary. I'm kind of grey enough to not quite remember it, but I mean, I remember the introduction of CMSs, and people were really freaked out by that in newsrooms. So I think that it's always evolved and adapted. I think that more importantly, though, these search and social media are not new. They've been with us for a very long time now, and I think that it's not just technology and kind of the potential or the threats of AI that are changing the way that people think and consume media. I think that audiences and how they find information has changed. And so I was part of this really interesting study with the FT strategies, where they looked at like how are people really consuming, and right across the world, from Nigeria through to Southeast Asia, North America, and so forth. And there's this cross-cutting thing that's happened with what they're calling next gen. So it's kind of anything with a gen in it. But basically, people are not finding media through brand recognition. It's through affirmation of what others in their trust circle or group are, and then also the way that they not just consume, but when they figure out what it really means and how relevant it is to them, again, is done differently from what people who consumed brand media do. So very much it's about, did you see this? Do you also think it's ground truthing it with others who you can relate to their lifestyles and their realities? And I think it's that level of validation that we're not used to. Previously, people would consume journalism because it's from the New York Times or whatever your local equivalent is. Now it's about, does it really resonate as true in the world that I live in through the lived experience of people in my circles?
It's more like identity?
It's identity, but even beyond that, I've got a 13-year-old daughter who lives on gaming platforms. And so in her mind, her social peers are the YouTubers she watches who play the games that she plays with, and she thinks that she knows them as intimately as she does the real people in her life. And so there's this cross-referential thing happening that I think many mainstream media just don't understand. But also it sets the priorities of what they think are really important. And I think that mainstream media hasn't yet cracked that code. And so often we're doing really good, innovative, meaningful journalism about things that people just don't care about.
But I think that's different, though, because there's a fundamental thing that we have to do as journalists that people in the parasocial world don't have to do, which is that we have to tell people things that they don't want to hear. And so we have to, the reservoir of trust that we build up with audiences is so that we can, in fact, tell them, this happened, this terrible thing happened, this is what appears to be the reason for this terrible thing happening, and this is how it may impact your life. The parasocial person never has to do that. As a matter of fact, the worst of these behaviors are, the worst of these actions or these kinds of like platforms, what they do is affirm your worst suspicions. Demagogues never tell you anything that you disagree with. They just find your worst, most basic instinct and replicate it. That ethnic group that you're afraid of, they really are out to get you. Those people who you work for, they really are exploiting you. This thing that you're worried, that disease that's off in another country really is coming to get you. And they just continually play upon that one kind of basic element. We actually have the comparatively more difficult job of saying, well, that ethnic group you're afraid of doesn't commit crime at any rate that's higher than your own group. Or this thing that you're thinking about really isn't. happening. And that makes it that much more difficult for us to compete in a world where people are oriented toward that kind of easy affirmation.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, those echo chambers can be corrosive because they're self-fulfilling. But I think that the affirming thing that we saw in the study was that this social validation is designed or meant exactly to cut through those echo chambers. So it's effectively debunking and neutralizing this kind of algorithmic-driven kind of content that because you clicked on this, we're going to give you everything that says that. It's almost breaking out of those feeds, live feeds. It was empowering, and it's beyond just digital media. We're seeing a lot of that now through social networking as well.
Sandrine, I want to ask you, and I want to get back actually to something that María Teresa mentioned earlier. Although we don't trust journalists or we don't trust journalism overall, at the same time, journalists are prosecuted. It's something that we see very often to be happened. So I want to ask you, when journalists risk their lives, and in the beginning, we just mentioned how many hundreds of journalists have been killed in a single war zone. So overall, and from your experience, when journalists risk their lives, have you ever have you ever asked yourself if, and if yes, was it worth it? I mean, lack of trust, at the same time, risk of your life?
Yeah, I mean, when a journalist is killed, and this is what I found out when I was working as editor-in-chief of Forbidden Story, or when he is threatened, arrested, it's usually because he was working on a story, on a huge story of public interest, that somebody wanted to silence, that, was for the good of society. So I don't know if this journalist thought his life was worth it, but we thought as a network, and Laurent Richard, who founded Forbidden Story, thought that, it was extremely important for society, for democracy, that that story at some point came out, because these are stories about corruption. These are stories about criminal organization, about drug trafficking, environmental crimes. So these are the stories why journalists are killed for. And it was very important at Forbidden Story to pursue that work. And the way we did it was, to create those collaborations, because it was much more difficult to attack 40 journalists, journalists who were working for big newsrooms, than isolated journalists who were often publishing their story on Facebook, and who were doing that often because they were not paid, without being paid, or and taking those risks. So we thought that those stories were worth becoming public. This was our conclusion. And just on trust, it's interesting. And audiences, and this discussion is very interesting because I spent last year at Harvard as an Eman Fellow, and trust was the theme that was chosen for us to discuss. And everybody was very much obsessed with audience. We were 24 fellows, and the one who were the most invited to conferences and seminars were the one who were focusing on content creators and social media, the former editorial director of Snapchat. All the others were sometimes invited, but they were not as popular. People wanted to understand and find solutions about how to connect with audiences, and it's important, I think, to ask ourselves that question as journalists. But coming from France and having started in French public TV, I also think that we have to think of journalism like something of public interest, and I'm not saying that funding from state is the solution to everything. Obviously, things can go very badly, but I still think that we need, as many of you said, we need to dig into things people don't want to say, people won't pay for, and we have to find ways to do that, even if we're not directly connecting with the audience. I don't know how much people read the story Fabrice Arfi wrote on Gaddafi, and it still ended up with a big legal decision.
Thank you very much, Sandrine. And Jelani, talking about being connected with the audience, I mean, as journalists in general, with the public and with the audience, what's going on with the youngest generation? I mean, most of them, they might not have any kind of experience of the real need of having journalism without the need calling or naming journalism like healthy journalism, transparent journalism, okay? And so they don't feel the need, as I said, and at the same time, this generation is 100% exposed to the social media platforms, any kind of platforms, to the tech industry overall, I would say, through apps or through platforms again, et cetera, et cetera.
So, I mean, I think there are a few things. You know, one is that from my vantage point at the journalism school, I'm amazed by what the younger generation is doing, because one, we have people coming to journalism school at a time where journalism is so embattled. And, you know, they are very often driven by a very clear understanding of what journalism is, what its societal function is, why it is crucial at this point in time. They don't have any illusions of wealth and glory, but they believe that they can contribute to something that is a bigger societal good. And, you know, as we have seen, I know, okay, part of my job, I will say this up front, part of my job is to always speak highly of Columbia Journalism School, right? But that said, as we have kind of navigated this kind of difficult moment, we have seen the caliber of our students increase, not decrease. And that has been something that has been, you know, a great boon to us as we're kind of navigating. In the bigger sense, I'm aware that not all the young people are enrolled at Columbia Journalism School. And so in the bigger sense, I think they have a different relationship to news media than very many of us did when we were their age. And they are more skeptical, more distrusting, and as a group, you know, statistically, that's what we see. But I always, whenever, especially when I'm talking to journalists about this, is that in some way we're getting a little bit of our own medicine, you know, because we have this constant conversation about the public not trusting us, and I always have to point out, you know, journalists are some of the least trusting people in the world. We don't trust anybody as a professional virtue. We're not supposed to. We're supposed to be skeptical. And so we can't be upset if people turn our own professional protocols on us. And so my argument has been that we don't have to regain the trust of the public. We just need the public to be as skeptical of all other sources of information as they are of us. And the benefit that we have is that if you apply equal skepticism, the one thing that journalists can do that the assorted charlatans, conspiracy theorists, and various other sorts that you encounter on the internet that they cannot do is that we can show you where we got our information. We can walk you through the steps. We can show our work.
Yeah, exactly.
If you ask us a question, we can answer, and we can give you facts.
Explain them.
Explain. Exactly. And so I think that that is the thing that we will have to become better at if we're going to build more of a relationship with the younger generations.
Charlie, after all this, and what's your point of view with regards to what is the biggest challenge, if we can call it like this, trust or attention?
Listen, I agree so much with what you just said about trust. I never want to hear that word again at a journalism conference. It's a completely misleading. Why are we beating ourselves up? Because there are surveys that say the public don't entirely trust journalism as a whole. I agree with Jelani. Why would you? I don't trust journalists. You know, why would you automatically? I agree with María Ressa, who says this is actually a tool that's being used by authoritarian regimes to undermine what good journalists do. So I completely agree with you on that one. I think there's a danger, again, of a kind of nostalgia when we think about what's the biggest problem in terms of audiences. You know, why don't they love us anymore? Why did they love all those other people? We did some work on influencers about 5 or 6 years ago, which said, instead of complaining about those people with their funny little lamps and their makeup tips, we should be learning from how brilliant they are at understanding their audiences, working their socks off to keep in line with their interests, working really hard to find material and content. We can learn so much from those dreaded people on social media. I think there's a real sense still. I mean, you were talking there about we show our workings. No. Most journalists do not show their workings. Most mainstream journalists assume that they have an authority over their audience and are more obsessed by audience levels, audience attention, than they are in terms of what their audience actually needs, the dreaded word user needs. And so I think it's going to sound a little bit academic, but there's a nostalgia for objectivity. Objectivity, as Jelani knows the history, that was a kind of device that journalists came up with about 100 years ago to say, we're different to that guy down the bar. We're different to those gossips. We're different to those people with their sort of scandal pamphlets and stuff like that. You can trust us because we try to tell the truth. We don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat, a socialist or a conservative. All of you will be able to understand that we are offering you a service that does its best to give a representation of the world. And I think that a lot of mainstream media has almost necessarily abandoned that. Not that they're lying, but because they have to chase an audience. Especially if you've got a subscription model, you have to pay attention to that segment of people. So you inevitably become more partisan and more focused on those people. And the real tragedy is that are you then finding those new people, the younger people, or people who are not represented automatically in your audience data. So I'm not suggesting that we have to go back to some beautiful objectivity, but I think that the task for us is to try and combine what you've said, transparency, evidence-based reporting, and we have to get a lot better at that, frankly, rather than just pandering to our own prejudices. But at the same time, this is where I disagree with you a little bit around the emotions thing. Emotions is utterly part of, somebody said, people's lived experience. When people come to you as a journalist, they don't just come to you because they want a set of facts. And if they did, well, they can get that from AI. They can get that from their librarian, you know? They're looking for somebody who's going to understand their values, their identity, their context, and even their feelings. You know, their feelings of hope, their feelings of fear, their feelings of belonging, or their feelings of being ignored. So in that sense, I think we have to combine this sense of what you said, accountable, evidence-based journalism, with a much more of an attachment, an understanding of our audiences.
I didn't want to monopolize, so I didn't express what I meant. Otherwise, if you have heard me, you would agree with me, because I completely agree with you. I was talking about something different. Avoid news because you don't feel that that they makes you feel,
yeah,
well...
That's another one I never want to hear at a conference again, by the way. Okay. There's no such thing as news avoidance. What there is people trying to choose to have a more healthy, balanced... I'm not disagreeing with you. Trying to have a healthy news diet. We should stop talking about news avoidance.
How would you call it then?
I would say, how do we help people to have a healthy news diet where they don't feel scared by the news, where they don't feel alienated by the news?
How?
There's a million different reasons. Give me another conference.
Give us, just explain.
My previous rant was partly about that. You know, but we've got to stop centering journalism on ourselves. We've got to stop saying, I'm making great journalism. Why are you avoiding it?
But I think there's an inherent difficulty in getting the public to say, you need to listen to, watch, or read this story about Gaza. I know it's worse than the story.
Gaza is a
I know,
hugely popular story.
but even then, they're saying that there are people who are just not able to read a
Not all
terrible
the time,
story,
not
a
every
terrible
day,
story,
not 6 hours a
and then
day,
read,
not
and read
relentlessly.
the next terrible story, and then read the next terrible story. But you also are obligated. There are people who are on the ground, there are people who are risking their lives in order to bring that information to the public. And we're at a place where there are really troubling, concerning things that go on that people are rightfully scared of. And so I think that that is an obstacle. But I do tell people, when I have these conversations, and they say, I've stopped watching the news, or I've stopped reading, and so on, I don't try to tell them that they should come back. You know, and in part, you know, I've been in dialogue with my friend Bruce Shapiro about this, about how people are traumatized and how we handle this. What I say is, can you find a balance? Like, how much of this are you able to countenance?
Yeah, there's a difference between the act of news avoidance and being a news avoider. You know, somebody who never wants to see a single bit of news. I don't think they exist, by the way. People will come across news even if they don't want to.
I have some relatives I can introduce you to.
Yeah, no, but they will still bump into stuff that, you know, even if they don't want to. But I mean, news avoidance is more, I'm going to try and take back control over all this tsunami of stuff that I'm getting.
I wanted to just nuance a little bit of what you were saying, in the sense that there's a tendency probably of saying, like, media before, media today. Media were very, very different in many different parts of the world. Like in my part of the world, I'm really glad that a lot of media are doing bad, because they weren't good media. They were completely aligned with whichever government was in government. They were always, you know, in my country, one of the mainstream media was the one who counted the votes. So that was their objectivity. So what I think is that in good hour, we have this humongous amount of younger generation doing amazing technical journalism, much more technical, much more fact-based, and much more critical of established truths that you shouldn't tell. When I started doing journalism when I was a kid in big newspapers, everything was saying, oh no, don't do this because it's not good for the democracy. It would destabilize democracy. Every truth would destabilize democracy. And I always said, well, democracy then it's very weak if it gets destabilized. So I'm just saying that idea of engaging with the audiences and not being completely fascinated by your journalism is what I was saying about really understanding that we are in a schisma, how do you say that? A moment of break, and we're finding our feet again. And of course, the best way to do that is engaging with the public again, no? But I do think that there is a difference of media depending on where are you speaking from. Not all the media of before were the New York Times and I don't know what. And even the New York Times, from some angles, you could be incredibly critical from the international perspective, for example.
I'm very curious about your comment, María Teresa, while you're here in Athens for the forum. If you turn on your TV, here in Greece I mean, and watch a bit of the Greek TV, either national or not, private, or read any newspaper or radio station, whatever, and come back afterwards and give us your feedback, because you described pretty much what's going on here in Greece. But at this point, I would like to give the microphone to all of you in case you would like to raise any question or to ask anything, any of our speakers, or to share with us any thought or whatever you want. Yes, there.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for the talk.
We can't hear you.
Whoa. They say it's on.
It is.
Okay. Hi, I'm Carlos.
Trust them.
I'm Carlos from Fundación Maldita. Thanks for the talk. My question, particularly for probably María Teresa and Mr. Cobb or Dr. Cobb probably, is about, I think we all understand the media ecosystem has changed in a way that it's much more diverse, which I consider a good thing. Like I could say the diet of information 40 years ago was much more limited. But I also have the feeling that that has some unintended or bad consequences in society, in the fact that it's hard sometimes to see or to ascertain a common reality so to then make decisions as a society. So I don't know if you feel like we can have some more social consensuses and still keep more diversity like we have in the informational sources. Thank you.
So I'll be brief. I think that's why we collaborate. That's why when if you are, we have a saying in Colombia, which is a beautiful saying that says, we are not machos. You understand machos, no? We are not, but we are muchos. We are many. So it is true that there's a lot of fragmentation in the audiences, and everyone looks at this because it's difficult for any citizen to go and look 200 media websites in one country. It's very difficult. But if you team together, for really big stories, to really tell the big stories we've done with Sandrine, for example, then people really look at them, because then they realize there's like whole realities, even cross-border realities that they didn't see. And I think that's a way to fight that kind of fragmentation.
I didn't realize until just now that we're both from Colombia.
It's a cup that says, I am from Colombia with a U, not Columbia.
I think that one of the other points about consensus and the kind of diversity of information is that there's an ideal in which, because there were problems with the old order, which was hegemony, that we had basically gatekeepers that controlled how much information, what kind of information, from what angle, and in America and in the United States, our media was incredibly monochrome, and it looked very homogeneous, from overwhelmingly white men of a particular social class who went to a handful of American universities. And so there was not even a question about whether that kind of default perspective influenced how news was reported, because there was only one way of understanding what news reporting was effectively. And there are other kind of independent media and smaller media, sure. But the most powerful media was incredibly singular. And now that that's been decentered, all kinds of voices can come to the fore. The difficulty is that not all of those voices will be equally responsible, not all of them will be equally professional, not all of them will even be equally healthy for the society itself. But we're still trying to navigate how we get the best of this new system, this multiplicity of avenues into the conversation, and mitigate the problems that we've been talking about, for the entire almost hour we've been up here.
Any other questions? Yeah, here. Here.
Thank you. I do have a question, but it somehow connects with what's been said, linking news avoidance to trust and how journalism evolves. I do think that the act of avoiding the news and choosing the news that you want is quite risky in the world we live now, because we have journalists who are as guilty of giving people the kind of news that feeds their bias as much as journalists who are doing otherwise. Case in point, because I'm from Nigeria, we have many of those, but case in point, what people are realizing is, for instance, the massive influence of Fox News and most of the Murdoch Empire news in the world, because I have an auntie who's an immigrant in America, and she says she listens to the news every day. She does, Fox News only, right? And she is choosing, according to her. In the conversation of echo chambers as well, I'm realizing that most audiences reject that, because to them, they're curating news that is diverse even if it's similar, but it's diverse because it's coming from different places, then in journalism, we're constantly chasing what the new challenge will be. Trust, avoidance, doubt, AI, constantly. And we say that we're evolving. But at the core of these things in the past, it used to be a certain ethos that guides journalism in general. And now I think I want to ask the professors and the strategists, what then is the ethos now? Especially when you can't blame the audience for not trusting you, when in general we have created doubt. And we, because it's not the audience's job to decide if Fox News is better than someone else or not. And using them as an example, I'll stop now. So I think the idea is, what's this foundational thing that would guide the journalists moving forward now, even as we evolve in AI, as we try to deal with avoidance, whether it exists or not, and whatever version trust or doubt is today?
Thank you for your question. Who wants to answer so that we can move forward? Because
I'll do a quick one, which is to avoid the question. It's a brilliant question and eloquently put, but in a way, I don't want there to be one journalism. I don't want there to be a foundational platform, if you like, which is recognizably that's journalism and that isn't. The one thing that I've really learned, I've gone from being, the typical bloody journalist, kind of the one that Jelani described, although I didn't go to a posh university, but I was that guy, the white guy who thought I knew what news was just by breathing, And I'm glad it's not like that anymore. I'm glad that it's fragmented, because 15, 20 years ago, when I started doing this LSE Prof thing, the discussions would be, how do we increase media plurality? Why are we being dominated by Rupert Murdoch? What can we do about this? And then, lo and behold, the internet came up with the answer, or one of the answers. And the joy of my job, can I speak out? The joy of my job, are we allowed to do that? I think we all should talk about joy a bit more, is that I meet people who, of course, are having a really tough time. They are really struggling, people trying to do news around the world. But they are also, they love doing it, they're very good, and they are all different. It's incredible. They, as I think I alluded to earlier, they have different business models, different purposes, they come from different backgrounds, they have different audiences, and I don't want to say to them, come and be, stamp you with an approval mark that you have a foundational belief. We can talk about things like, accountability and a desire to communicate. I think those things are important. I think curiosity, wanting to connect, and having a love of the craft, those 3 C's, I think are lovely things to be a journalist, but they're not exclusive.
Thank you. One more question there, and one more so that we can have the time afterwards. There, please. Yeah, not there, but it's okay. I mean, we have, okay, go ahead, and then right behind afterwards, and then one question from here, and then we will continue. We have to continue our discussion. Yes?
Thank you. My name is Farhad Ahmed. I'm a young
Could you
imam.
please a bit louder?
Yeah, sorry. My name is Farhad Ahmed. I'm a young imam from London. In my work, I often engage with young Muslims about the role that they feel about the media. And I often hear that they feel like the media has misrepresented them often. We have conversations with them. We try and arrange journalists to come and visit our mosques to better open up ourselves and the youth and expose them to those conversations. But I just wonder whether in editorial boards, whether there are conversations about how we've got to the stage of being in where we have to navigate the age of doubt. Is there reflection about those communities who feel like they've been misrepresented?
Are people talking about...
Charlie's here. Go ahead.
We're fellow Londoners, we're fellow Brits, so I can translate for them. He's just saying that are there conversations in newsrooms about the way that still they can tend to underrepresent people, for example, young Muslims?
Who wants to answer?
Is there a conversation amongst your students, for example?
Oh, certainly. And so, there are conversations. Those conversations are complicated by the war that our current presidential administration is waging on what people call diversity, equity, and inclusion, and have kind of made those dirty words. But every person that I know that's in like a major position in the journalism world understands in some way, to some degree or another, that your coverage is only as good as your representation, and that you have to bring people from a diverse array of communities into the fold if you want to get coverage that is in any way representative of the society that you're operating in. There's different degrees of commitment to that, there are different degrees of this, but if your question is simply, are people aware of this and is this a conversation, I would say very much so.
Thank you. So keep it short, please, and right after here so that we can go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. Is it going?
Yeah?
No? There we go.
Okay.
My name's Tim Schaefer. I'm a professor at the University of Delaware, and I direct something called the SNF Ethic Initiative about civil discourse and engagement related to the media. So my question is, one of the points you made earlier was talking about collaboration, particularly across kind of professional journalism. And so I'm thinking about how you, and this is not everybody, and I know this is a quick question, how do you engage your audiences less maybe as consumers, but more as people within this context that we're talking about of having doubt?
And this is a discussion we had 2 years ago.
Yeah, yes, in many ways.
Consumers or citizens,
yes.
exactly. Who
Thank
wants
you.
to answer? Sardine.
Was the question about collaboration?
Justin, use the microphone if you wish, please.
Yeah, I think this is, I'm working for non-profit media organization or state-funded organization. This is, not a question addressing the audience as citizens and not non-consumers is something that was very clear in my mind. And I'm very surprised. The other day I was listening to the Reuters Institute report, press conference, and they were mentioning every country as markets. And I found that very weird, mentioning markets, the French market, the British market, the US market. Why do we speak of, instead of speaking of country, why do we speak of markets? I understand that, part of the media is commercial and need to make money. Not all media are like that. We're all very concerned about our audiences, of course, because even if we're not funded by subscribers, we still need to prove to our funders or to the state that we are engaging with people. So we have this in mind, but I don't think that every journalist today, specifically in the world where I work, which is a non-profit world. GIJN is an organization, a network of more than 260 non-profit media organizations specialized in investigations. I don't think that those media are connecting with their audiences as consumers. So I think we need to differentiate different worlds, different media. We also need to differentiate journalists from opinion, and you were mentioning Fox, and I think that there is a kind of confusion today between people who are expressing opinions and journalists, and I think we need to be very clear about what we're doing and how we're working, and if we come back to the roots of our profession, I think it's about just getting the information out and being right about it. So it's not treating people as consumers, but understand there is a need for that as well.
I think I agree with you completely, and I think kind of going back to Charlie's fashionista kind of bloggers or whatever they are, influencers, I think that one of the things that we're seeing media starting to learn from these non-journalists is that you need to connect in a meaningful way by understanding firstly what utility or what you're giving them that they need. And we're seeing large media trying to recreate this with these little blog posts, newsletters. They tend to be very personally branded or personal brands rather than a New York Times brand. It's platformed by big media. And they're almost trying to build small villages or communities by breaking apart these very large audiences into things that are more intimate. So I think what I'm trying to say is they're seeking intimacy between themselves as producers and their audiences, because that builds empathy, that builds this deep loyalty. Whether we're getting it right, because again, it's driven by business, and so often it's commoditized, is a different issue. But you're seeing a lot of the more successful ones spin out as small little new journalism operations that seem to be making a good go for it, and so are getting something right. The problem is the longevity. How do you keep that intimacy and that relevance and that connection? Or is it actually a limited shelf life that we should accept? That these things evolve and the relationships evolve, and you move on to the next kind of sincere, authentic connection. So I think learning that is a question that's going to be a moving target.
And I totally agree with you. I think we have to need from content creators, to learn from content creators, some things that are, their sincerity is something that we had lost, I think. I think I'm speaking about big legacy newsrooms, but they speak in a much more sincere way, at least it looks more sincere to their audiences, and probably because we became those big machines, and some media, we lost that, and we need to find a way to speak honestly to the audience, and this is what we can learn from those creators.
Here, I think, then there, and then we'll come there.
Hi, thank you. I'm George Konstantakopoulos. I'm a technologist, strategist, social innovation coach, and I've recently joined a Greek NGO working in the fields of health, education, and sports, so I'm not a journalist. For me, I think, thank you for such an interesting conversation. For me, I think there are two main catalysts, factors that influence today's life. I think one, you've tapped into these two, I think. One is fear. There is so much fear, and government regimes, if you want, tap into that. As well as, and the most critical one is, I think there is a lack of critical thinking. And I think this links both to what you said, that there is a lack of objective discussion taking place in the center, like the center has been taken over from extremes. So my question is, how do we take that back? Like, what would you, like, if you had, I mean, we can take it in a creative way.
That's a big question.
I know, like, so, I mean, if you had a magic wand, let's say, if you would wake up tomorrow morning and you could change something, one thing, what would that be?
One thing that I would say is that I don't have any answers, and I was the one who mentioned that, but I do think that we have to explain it to make sense to people. So we started with fact-checking, and everybody was obsessed with fact-checking. And then we went into trying to understand who is disinforming, and how are they disinforming, and who are the guys who are producing all this junk information. And then now we are getting more into understanding the system, the method. So I think if people learn how these things are made and how these are created, right now we're doing an investigation about Peruvian disinformation and how the system worked. And we found, now we're very happy because we found a pattern. I mean, we're not very happy because it's terrible for journalists, but we found a pattern that it's actually repeated ever. And when you show people, so we're not fighting, this is a lie, this is a lie, this is a lie, because we'll never get there. And as you said, it's much more difficult for us because we have to prove it. We cannot just say whatever we want. So it's much more difficult. But we can start showing the system, how it works. And people start understanding, so now I know where this came from. So when you show that the consultants that are being hired, many of them are using that fear as a system, and they actually say it in their conferences outright. You have to use fear to win an election. We've heard that in the consult. So when you start showing the backstage, people are starting to understand and maybe start to take a little bit more critical that piece of information they get from their auntie or friend or whatever. But that's no answer. That's just a beginning of a very complex problem.
Exactly, and I think that the answer is, unfortunately, no answer so far, to be honest. So we are already running out of time, but I would politely ask for 5 more minutes, thank you. And because we have 2 more questions, please keep them short. Yes, and right after to you. Wait, please, for the microphone.
Thank you. You try for the truth, but as you mentioned, a lot of people seek for a false world. So they don't seek for the truth. They don't follow a lot. What they want is a false world to live in. They need to communicate with their group, with people that they like, with the same game. I'm an educator, Vita Mariottaki, and I want to point out that I see that they don't want to communicate out of a world, and sometimes they want it a false world. So what can you do as journalists, trying to give them the truth or give them a false idea of the world or of a group? Because I see that a lot.
Thank you. Any idea?
I'll try to answer very quickly. I think that we have to recognize that the nature of the work that we do, we're here to provide people a record of events. We're here to give people information about the world. But we have limited ability to make people actually absorb that. And we can market, and we can do focus groups, and we can see what makes people, what is most appealing. But fundamentally, people have to also be willing to engage. And I think that that is a difficult thing to say, it's a difficult thing to accept, but we don't really determine the way in which people will consume the information that we provide. The best we can do is be rigorous about this and say that we have fact-checked, and we have edited, and we have researched, and we've reported, and we've done everything, and here it is. And our hope is that people read this, or they watch it, or they listen to it, and they respond in a particular way in their own lives. But I don't think that we have control over that.
Yes, Charlie.
Just quickly, agree with Jelani, what Jelani just said there. María hinted at this as well, which is recent research is showing that there's no point going around telling people, you are in a fake world, you don't understand the truth. It has the opposite effect that you might intend. They will see you as the enemy. They will see you as insulting and threatening them. And I think
this sounds like my home life when I'm talking to my children.
Right.
Where they don't believe anything I'm telling them either.
Yeah, exactly. Me talking to my students. So you've got to think of different ways of doing it. You cannot fact-check your way to democracy. Fact-checking is great, it's important, it's groundwork, but it clearly does not work in terms of the problem you describe. And again, if I may say, I think it's a kind of wrong description. You think they're in a fake world. They think you're in a fake world. So perhaps you're the problem, you know? Same with filter bubbles. I don't see what's wrong with the filter bubbles. I love my filter bubble. I love being who I am with my background and my values and my beliefs. Why do you want to change me, you know? I'll give you an example, though, of where I saw a great example of where people were converted, and unfortunately had nothing to do with journalism. During COVID, I live in a very poor area with very high population of ethnic minorities, and there was a real problem that most people in the UK did want the vaccine, but a lot of people from minorities did not, because they had a historic distrust of the health service. So they were bombarded with social media messages saying, it's safe, it's all right. They were given loads of pamphlets and leaflets through their front door. didn't work. What worked was a doctor or a nurse knocking on their door, having a 5-minute conversation about their fears, explaining it person to person, ka-ching, they got the jab the next day. So I don't know what the lesson is there, but it's something about not demonizing people who think differently to you.
And actually, when they ran exactly the same experiment with AI, someone having a conversation with a conspiracist, but with an AI bot, the conversation convinced them, the facts didn't. So they could work through that process, ask the questions, and it had a bigger impact than actually just being presented with a fact check.
Yeah, very interesting. Yes, the last question.
Finally, I hit many times that AI, artificial intelligence, will replace journalism, good journalists, and will kill journalism. Do you believe it's true?
What's the question about AI killing journalism?
AI, overall, the relationship between AI and journalism and journalists, and if AI will kick off journalists.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I took so many AI classes last year at Harvard. I was, at some point, depressed by the capacities of AI. You know, some journalists told me that workflow has totally changed now. Instead of starting by a Google search, they would write a long prompt and launch a deep search, and in 5 minutes they would have, you know, the result of the work of two weeks of investigation. But I think one thing AI will never be able to do is go out and meet with people and just report on the ground. Whatever capacities AI have, it will never do that. So in a way, it brings us to, you know, the roots of our job, being there out in the field, and sometimes AI can, you know, deal with some systematic, boring tasks, which will help us focus on the important stuff, you know, getting out and reporting. And I think AI will never kill journalism.
I think, yeah, I agree with you. Although slightly different, because I think AI in a $6,000 embodied robot that is already on the market from China might be able to go out into the field. And so we're going to have walking chatbots. But I think, I mean, my answer to the same question would be, AI is a technology, and it's what we do with it, whether it's going to kill it at all or not, journalism. And I think that trying to say that it's good or evil, or it's going to be kind of destructive or not, this depends on how we leverage that in terms of both creativity and responsibility. But I mean, Charlie's the one who should actually be answering the questions, having run in journalism.
I agree with you guys.
For once. But I think it's not as scary as what potentially, we need to be angstful, we need to kind of be aware that we need to look at this very critically and figure out what to do so that we don't make the same mistakes like we did with search and with social, where we stood back, or were co-opted by the very large platforms that want to make money off us. And the fight and the conversations we should be having now should be around how we're managing our IP, not in a way that's refusing to let it be used, but how do we license it, not just us as the media, but every single one of us has individual data and information that they are hoovering up at the moment. How do we control that and take back agency? I think social and search and the rest of it, we've allowed these very large tech platforms to evolve, like we did Murdoch, and now kind of the new folk are grabbing up platforms to become media empires in the US, in North America. We need to take that back from them.
Just one sentence. I do agree with them. I would just say, though, that I'm much more worried about AI being used in defense or crime or security, or even in some ways in things like medicine, but certainly in social security. I'm much more worried about the power of big companies like Palantir than I am by if a few journalists start to use ChatGPT. And that is why everybody who calls themselves a journalist in this room or works with journalists should know much more about AI, because it's going to be part of the world that you are supposed to be reporting upon.
So before we close, one final question. Is there anything else that you would like to share with the audience and I didn't ask you, or they didn't ask you for? Thank you. So, thank you for being here with us. Many thanks to all of you. And with all these approaches and all these ideas, with all these disagreements or similarities with regards to the findings around this age of doubt, we just kicked off the forum, the 7th International Journalism Forum of IMED. We'll see you in a few minutes outside at our beautiful yard, but of course, we will meet tomorrow morning and we will stay here for sure by Saturday night. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you.